Okay, well, hello everybody. Good evening. I am Alex Androsik from the Penn Yan Public Library, the Adult Services Director here, and welcome to our Conversation Cafe on this probably pretty charged topic, which in my mind I have been thinking of as the Conversation Cafe on CRT, but as you may have seen in the description, if you saw this in the newspaper or online or anything like that, that's not really what we're talking about. That's part of what we're talking about. But really, we're just here to discuss the ways that issues of race, diversity, equity, justice, and all that stuff do and do not show up in education and the role that plays in our society, our well-being, and all that good stuff. So I want to thank you for being here. I am recording the panel discussion portion, but I will turn the recording off for any discussion from the audience we get towards at the end. And I want to start with a land acknowledgement. So I would like to acknowledge with respect that Penn Yan Public Library sits on the ancestral lands and waterways of the Haudenosaunee people. All of our work, services, and programs occur on land that was cared for and called home by the Haudenosaunee for over 1,000 years. Yates County is part of a region that remains home to the Haudenosaunee. We acknowledge the ongoing history of dispossession at work here and are grateful to live, work, and share experiences like this one on these lands. And I would also like to do a privilege acknowledgement, which I have not seen as widespread, so you might not have encountered a privilege acknowledgement. And I've just kind of made this up on the fly, so I don't know how representative it is, but it speaks to at least something that I think is important to express. So I invite you to join me in acknowledging your privilege, whatever it may be. Reflect on all of the identities that you claim and the ways that some of them grant you privilege, while others have historically served as points of marginalization, otherization, and oppression. Know that everyone at times benefits from privilege and at other times suffer from its lack. Know also that in the conversation that we're about to have, just like in life in general, some of the identities that you claim may become focal points for questioning and criticism. Commit to understanding these as critiques of systems, not of you as an individual. And if you see your beliefs and behaviors reflected in the criticism of such a system, commit to avoid taking umbrage and rather to work towards making the system better. So with that out of the way, I will move on to my introductions of our guest panelists here tonight. We're very happy to welcome them from points near and far. And first we have Erin Elkins. Erin served as a school librarian for 10 years. As a school librarian, Erin achieved national board certification and served as an assessor for the national board. In addition to running a vibrant school library program, he worked to increase collaboration between school and public libraries, serving as the liaison to the PANELISTS Public Library Cooperative's Young Adult Special Interest Group. After leaving pre-K to 12 education to complete his Information Studies Ph.D. at Florida State University, Erin was hired at Texas Women's University School of Library and Information Studies in Denton, Texas, where he is now a tenured professor. Dr. Elkins' current research streams are focused on unpacking social information culture and improving diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice in the LIS field, that's Library and Information Studies, and Academy. Welcome, Erin. Thank you for joining us from all the way from Texas.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. We also have with us Karen Earl. She is a native of Penn Yan who obtained her master's degree in marriage and family therapy and certificate of advanced studies in trauma-informed practice from Syracuse University. As a master's student, Karen studied academic therapy and studied systemic therapy and completed 2 internships providing therapeutic services under trained supervision. Additionally, she gained specialized training and experience as part of her program's gender expansive support team, helping individuals and families navigate gender exploration and/or transition. Currently, Karen is a newly licensed marriage and family therapist and provides therapy services to individuals, couples, and families at Harvest House Counseling in Syracuse, New York. She hopes to specialize in grief and loss therapy and work with a variety of populations to break mental health stigma and bring about healing. Thank you for joining us, and welcome back digitally to your native village.
I was actually there this past weekend,
Oh,
very
fantastic.
briefly, but not for very long. But thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. And finally, I would like to introduce Tracey Farmer. Tracey has been an educator for over 30 years an educator who has worked with children and adults. She holds degrees in criminal justice, education, child development, and administration. Tracey is a master teacher of mathematics, and one of her many skills is in diversity, equity, and inclusion, facilitating discussions and learning around these concepts and what this means for all people. Tracey resides in the town of Greece with her husband, Elliot, and currently is serving her second term on the Greece Central School Board. She's got 3 grown children and 5 grandchildren. Tracey is a lifelong learner who enjoys traveling, motorcycles, communing with nature, and sitting by a campfire listening to music. All excellent, excellent things to pursue. Thank you for being with us, Tracey. All right. And just a couple more little things before we dive right in. I would like to share briefly my screen here to show some agreements we're going to attend to, primarily in the discussion after the panel discussion. If there's discussion with the audience members, it's important to have certain expectations about how we are going to be together. So if I can just share that quickly. It might be a little bit hard for you to see on your end, but these are the Conversation Cafe agreements. This is an actual organization that helps facilitate these kinds of discussions in communities. And they really just make sure that in our conversations, we valorize these 6 behaviors and practices. So we are going to all practice open-mindedness, and if you listen to and respect all points of view. We're going to practice acceptance, in which we suspend a judgment as best we can. We are going to practice curiosity. So we're going to seek to understand more than persuade. I say more than persuade because sometimes persuasion is okay. But we are also going to practice discovery. So we're questioning assumptions and looking for new insights. We are all going to practice sincerity, in which we speak from our heart and personal experiences. And I'm officially going to start practicing brevity now. We're going to be short and simple as best we can, to the point. I've gone on long enough, so if we are all good with that, I can share this to the chat if people are interested in kind of keeping it, keeping those thoughts in mind. So let me just drop that in the chat right here. So you should get that link, and you can just kind of have that on the side if you want. So with that said, let's dive right in. And the first question that I would like to pose to our panelists goes like so. So in your work, and we've got three people with different backgrounds and different professional pursuits. So in each of your pursuits, how do you approach the question of race and justice issues within your discipline? Teaching it, discussing it, dealing with it. And as part of that, is critical race theory a part of it? If so, what does it look like? If not, how do you approach race and justice in your work? And I think I will just kind of go in order for this one, just so we can each get our thoughts in. So Aaron, if you don't mind taking a stab at that one first.
Oh, sure. The libraries are institutions that serve the entire community. I often teach our foundations course, and that is a large part of what I try to communicate in the course, is that we work to serve the entire community. We work to build the community, help the community grow. And that means everybody in the community. I wouldn't say that I explicitly say, here is critical race theory and here's how it works, or here's criticism or anything like that. I think probably it's more of a kind of discussion about social justice issues and how they relate to the library. So, we do talk about, things like how race is a construct, and we talk about privilege and intersectionality, so that the students can kind of understand a little better, how, as you mentioned, the various aspects of our identities variously privilege or marginalize us, and give them that understanding of themselves so that they can take that understanding and use it in their approach with the patrons. So I wouldn't say it's like explicitly like it's critical race theory week, but it's rather, these are the topics that we're covering. And I mean, in my work as a school librarian, we would talk about, racial issues, but not in a, because I was an elementary school librarian, so it was more of a like historical kind of like, let's talk about Ruby Bridges. Let's talk about one year one of our state award books was talking about how pool the communities in the South would fill their community pools rather than integrate them. So we would, read stories and kind of approach it from that point of view, with a kind of emphasis or view towards, our character aspects like respect and, how we get along with each other. So
That's interesting. So you sort of got to see it from two different perspectives over the course of your career. Being a practitioner within a school library, you had one experience with diversity issues. As a practitioner at the academic level, you saw it in a very different way, and maybe an upper level more explicitly, still not critical race theory, because that's, not necessarily relevant to every classroom, even at that level, but more calling out and discussing and figuring out some of those deeper issues. So it's interesting to hear that sort of dichotomy. And I think that if Tracey, if you don't mind taking that question up next.
Okay, hi, thanks, Alex. Aaron, yeah, so you're saying that you were an elementary, like I was mainly a sixth grade teacher. So one of the things that I was part of a center, the Rochester Teacher Center, and the focus was on classical Africa, self-identity, cultural identity, who are we? So I would spend time talking about classical Africa, we would discuss in terms of what Africa was like, because most times when you ask kids, African-American kids, where they're from, they'll say the state, southern state that they're from. Their family migrated during the Great Migration up to Rochester. And so there's no connection with Africa. And I found that as I would talk about Timbuktu or Mansa Musa, and the kids would just like be so totally engaged and interested in their history, their culture. I mean, I know where my ancestors came from before they came to the United States. And it means something to me to know that. So it was interesting to see how that work within the classroom did make some sense with kids. It made some connections. It started to build some pride in who they were and where they came from, because we tend to start African-American history with enslavement. So who wants to, you want to know more about your history, and the fact that the first library was in Timbuktu, that matters. That means something. I also am doing what's interesting right now, the work that I'm doing now within my community as a board member, because we have people at the board mad because, and so all of a sudden critical race theory came up. About 10 years ago, when I was working on my the Noyce Fellowship, I did a research and a presentation on critical race theory. So to me, it just made perfect sense, because really, I mean, yes, you can use a racial lens to look through, but at the same time, it was this whole thing about just, this is history, it's history. This is what happened. There were facts, there was history. It wasn't putting anybody down, but it was calling out, it was also naming whiteness, the cultural identities that we all have in the United States. So I remember the professor, the other students in the class, just like, wow, it just was like, wow, it lit people on fire. So when this has come up currently in current day, I'm just like, what is going on? And, so I have my ideas, but what I'm trying to do in my community right now is bridge this gap. I'm trying to build relationships with the people who are speaking out against it, the people who are speaking out against masks. I met with a couple of them last week, and we had great conversations. The one man, he actually grew up across the street from my aunt and uncle. I mean, how much luckier can you get when it comes to building a relationship, right? So he immediately kind of got my culture just based on that. So it's definitely work that needs to be done, because we're not going to just change it by him. Anyway, it's good work. I'm feeling good about what's happening right now.
That's
Right
great.
now.
Well, it sounds like you're doing real on the ground bridge building as you work that can be very difficult to figure out how to even start to do that. So hats off to you for finding some success with that. And I certainly hope that it continues. Mm-hmm. And I mean, I think that between the two of you, it becomes obvious that critical race theory is not this idea that is being put forth of it in certain circles, that it's being this indoctrination that's being leveled at children from kindergarten onward. It's just really not the case, and it's really a conflation of a lot of other things that for certain purposes, let's say for now, is being sort of put on a target on its back. So, and I think we'll get a little bit more into that as we go along. But Karen, do you have any insight into how this whole topic plays into your background and what you do every day?
Yeah, it's a little different. I will say that from a mental health standpoint. So one thing to consider is the entire field of mental health, right, was founded essentially by a cis white man. I mean, you're going to think mental health, you're going to think psychology, you're going to think Freud. And that's an unfortunate thing. And yeah, he made some contributions, but that's there. So anyone who is within the mental health field has to take that acknowledgement and know, hey, we have some things that we've got to work on too, just as much as anybody else. What I think is interesting is, Tracey, you're mentioning like working relationally. That's the whole point of my discipline. Marriage and family therapy came about in the 1970s as a result and move away from individual psychology in viewing things from an individual standpoint. The idea is we are people, we are relational in nature, we are systemic. So if you focus on a person and you focus on that problem only, and you send them back into their world, what is that going to do? What is that going to accomplish? So as history moved on, we realized there is a benefit to looking at the entire system. And we're not even just talking about the family or the marriage, we're talking about the community on a macro level. What is happening in a person's life that is occurring within them now? When I do an assessment with a person, part of my shtick is looking at things from a biopsychosocial perspective. So I consider biologically what is happening, diagnosis, which is, and we need to establish that too, fundamentally colonialized and, not okay. The DSM is not okay in many ways. That is something that we have to acknowledge. And I look at their social background, like what are their supports? There is a lot to consider when we look at a person. So I wouldn't say critical race theory is really in its core form part of what I do, but intersectionality is so vital to the mental health field, because I never know who's going to be on the other side for me, who's going to be sitting in the chair or on the screen nowadays for me. And I have to be prepared for anything pretty much. Who is this person? Who are they coming? Like, why are they coming to me? What is their life? What are they looking at? What are their daily struggles? And I think what's interesting is, this is about teaching. I end up being the learner in many cases. And it's humbling. It's very humbling, especially with the privilege. And I loved that inclusion, Alex, like the inclusion of like noting your privilege. that is often part of my position, is to realize, I have privilege here. You know, you teach me, let me be part of your life, and the fact that I want to know what's going on with you. So mental health in itself, it's a lot of work to be done, but we have been making so many great strides in trying to figure out, hey, how do we be humble and learn just as much as anybody else?
That is fantastic. And I love how, you've sort of tied together a few of the themes we've already seen so far here, between this idea that it's all about relationship building and that relational interaction between individual people, groups of people, and then getting back from that individual level to understanding the systemic forces at play beyond them, and how that's something that's just as important to address, if not more so, as you say. So thank you for that insight. And of course, we all love learning here, I think. And so to know that we are, no matter what position we're in a position always to learn more and become better. So that is fantastic. I do want to get more into what actually goes on in the standard K through 12 classroom, to the extent that we're able to, and what this kind of education looks like on the ground, as opposed to this sort of critical race theory boogeyman sort of thing we've got. But I do want to dig a little bit more into what's going on in the world, in the country right now, that has made that idea such a like a boogeyman. It's just sort of the villain du jour for certain folks. And we see examples of it, beyond what they're calling critical race theory, but it all gets kind of lumped together. We've got opposition to the 1619 Project, which was just an attempt to look honestly and fairly at the history of the United States from a perspective of the arrival of chattel slavery as being sort of the inciting moment of our national culture. Agree, disagree. That's, reasonable people can do that, but the level of just sort of volatility that has erupted around just that proposition has been incredible to see. All of the bills going up in state legislatures across the country that would bar teachers from mentioning certain topics. The idea that, we have to legislate away teachers from instilling shame in students of certain races. We can't mention that, in Texas, perhaps Aaron knows about this one, that, teachers wouldn't be allowed to mention that the men who defended the Alamo also owned slaves. So what do you think is motivating this resistance to the teaching of what is just being lumped together as this CRT label, whatever it may actually be? Where does that come from? Do you have a sense of that? And I'll let whoever wants to jump in on that one go ahead.
What do you mean? Could you rephrase that? So do you have a sense of CRT? What do you, yeah.
Do you have a sense of what's causing this blowback to what it is deeming CRT?
Yeah, yes. I think that, okay, I'm gonna go in this direction. Let's think about Bacon's Rebellion. Okay, talk about what historical significance that had with poor people in the forming of this country. So the system is designed, for the haves to have, and it's this whole idea of people who have, and how they are hurt by this whole system is they have to be on guard all the time, that they don't ever lose any of their stature or their power or their status, and it's mind-blowing to me, because that's been, you talk about learning, Karen, that's a relatively new. I've recently started to look at class and in terms of intersectionality, because for so long it was, racism is what needed to be the focal point, and I don't disagree with that, but I certainly believe that since I've been studying this, at this point it feels like this whole idea of class undergirds and holds it up, or maybe it's the other way around. I haven't quite, really dug that deep. As I'm in the process of learning this right now. So I appreciate you listening to my thoughts. So I believe that when things are positioned in such a way or said in such a way that makes us or individuals feel that, you talked about privilege earlier, Alex, and we think about the United States, which is even the chaos that's happening right now, the United States is still the shining star on the hill. So I'm going to stop there. I'm going to go into look at your brevity piece, Alex. And
Hard, I know. All right, and
Well,
Aaron, you were sort of laughing evilly a moment ago. So.
I can't help. I just have an evil laugh.
Okay.
I'm not evil. I'm just drawn that way.
Yeah.
But no, like Tracey, like 100%. Like the I think that the people in power are rightly terrified of having the curtain ripped away, because racism was invented. Sorry, he has not had attention in a few minutes. So racism was invented to keep the poor whites from joining the blacks together to like overthrow the wealthy landowners. Like that's the whole purpose of racism, was to keep the wealthy and powerful wealthy and in power. So if if we look today and we can see the long history of the structural racism in this country, and that all of the systems have been built and designed in such a way to keep the wealthy and powerful wealthy and in power, they got to be sweating that a little bit, because as a good democracy depends on a well-educated populace. And as people find this stuff out and realize that some of their prejudices are maybe really not based on actual fact, that they've been systemically fed to them, it's going to be a lot more people ready to tear stuff down. And I would imagine that's got the wealthy and powerful concerned a bit. So
Absolutely. How about you, Karin? Do you have anything to add?
It's interesting because early in the pandemic, to what were you going to really focus on for yourself? I live in the former 15th ward of Syracuse, and that was really mind-boggling to kind of understand. So I was in one of the remaining locations of the Red Line district, and Syracuse University keeps trying to buy property and build upon it and make everything bigger and what have you. And it's sometimes a really gross notion for me to kind of sit with that and understand. And I like, where am I living and how does that influence me? And if you pay attention at all to recent things, I-81 in New York, we are about to go a really big undertaking where it's going to get torn down. Well, I-81 got built in the 1950s and 60s, straight through the 15th ward. Everyone was displaced. And this idea that we're going to take this down and cause even more chaos for a lot of people to be able to get to their jobs and where they live, it's just kind of mind-boggling when it goes to that level. It's so apparent, it's so there. What I will say, why there is such a big pushback in wanting to learn and wanting to grow, I think particularly from a small town perspective, there's this notion that, oh, you're blaming me. This is my fault. Why is it my fault? Part of what I have had the privilege to learn from several other people is the concept of intergenerational trauma and how that spans, and where does it come from, and where is it going to go? And I think many times, especially in small town rural communities, people are like, well, we're oppressed too. You know, we live in poverty. Don't you see that? Like, and then those, if, you know, the veil being lifted, you know, and the idea, oh, these people speak for me. These people are going to protect me and protect where I am. And I like that idea, Erin, where you're saying, well, they're got to be getting nervous, because eventually, if this knowledge is getting to a general community and saying, no, this is a lot bigger and complicated than you may seem, and it's, you know, what happens when people finally become educated about certain topics and realize, no, you've all been kind of duped into infighting. It's so complex. So I'll stop there.
Absolutely. You know, the this notion of folks feeling like they are being blamed for something, I think that has a huge role to play. And I came across a line that I really like that I'm going to try to absorb and sort of embody myself. It's really hard sometimes. And I think it was in the webinar where I actually got connected with you, Tracey, so you might remember this too. But one of the presenters said, be hard on systems, be soft on people. And that's so important to try and remember, and to continue to have empathy as we attempt to do this bridge building type behavior. I will be the first to admit that it's really, really hard for me personally, and I know it's hard for a lot of people, but I really love that construction of being hard on systems and soft on people. And then what it comes to is kind of like what you're all saying, helping folks to understand the realities of, you know, it is really a class structure thing that if we can all kind of band together with this understanding of where our oppressions are coming from, we'll find we're kind of all more allies than anything else, and maybe together we can change some things. I also feel like this all gets at the notion of America's obsession with meritocracy, where like we believe as a society, maybe not on individual levels, but as a society, we're taught anybody can accomplish anything if we work hard enough. And critical race theory itself, but also just any of these discussions of the actual history of the United States shows that it's not that simple. And it's a lot more complicated than that for a lot of people, for reasons that a lot of people don't want to look at. So I think that's awesome insight on the class issue, and just trying to have empathy with each other. One of the things that I've noticed come up a lot in the pushback to, you know, the education, the actual teaching of American history, to efforts at racial, you know, being racially sensitive and aware of each other, is that, and this kind of goes with what Karen was saying about, you know, people being blamed for something. There's a sense parents are saying at school board meetings and in letters to the editors and things, well, you're making my child feel ashamed. You're making my child feel less than. You're making my child feel uncomfortable in the classroom. Do any of you have a particular response to that sort of impulse? If you were to encounter that, maybe Tracey, you have, I'm not sure. But if you were to encounter that argument, what might you say to a parent?
Sorry. Well, I don't think it's a matter of saying, I think it's a matter of listening. And I think that this idea of shame can be unpacked just as a human thing. A human, I don't know if it's I don't know the right word, you know, I just part of who we are as human. And once we can dig under the shame, like, so if a parent is saying something about shame, there's some shame happening in the parent, I believe. I'm not a psychologist, but just with my experience, Karen, so please, you know.
You're not wrong. You're absolutely, you're dead on. You're dead on.
So which is why I think it's important to have the conversation. So, you know, I don't know where I would go. And right now I'm in the middle of planning and brainstorming a committee that I want to have that's bringing people from diverse thought, age, however, whatever diversity looks like for you. So, and I've been jotting things down every time I have a list of topics, and none of those topics is critical race theory. One of them, actually, it's in the car, or I would grab it, but so it's about an understanding of different concepts, different ideas, even something. So one of the things that I thought about bringing up today, I was at a board retreat and we were talking about exemptions for veterans exemption, the STAR program. I don't know if you guys have it in the South, but it's like percentages off of your taxes, your homeowners based on, a number of things. So I jotted that down and I thought, well, this might be a good thing to talk about because it would bring out different people's point of views and without. So it's very different from what I normally do because I do training on DE. I do training on this. And so, with people who are coming to the training, it's all about critical, it's all about racism. It's all about redlining. It's all about all of these concepts that we know are structural racism, which we know exist. But we have to, I feel that I have to go before that. So what am I doing before this for people who are struggling with shame, for people who are struggling with the idea of racism, who think, this idea that they have, that they're poor. So, why are they any worse? Why are they considered to be better off because of the color? They happen to be white. So that's where I'm at right now. And this is helpful. I'm glad to be here.
Awesome. How about you, Karen? Do you have any insight? I know you you affirmed part of what Tracey was saying there. Anything you want to add to that?
So I love working with teens. I find most teens to be absolutely brilliant. I'm not very good at anything younger than 10. I will say that. Telehealth is also not really set up for anything younger than 10. That should be noted. Brene Brown, maybe as educators, you might know who Brene Brown is a wonderful, got her doctorate in social work. She jokes all the time, I study shame. And she seems appropriate to reference here is, and I'm paraphrasing, so I apologize, but, she says, shame is about noticing, there is some character flaws on us. And to some degree, we have to embrace that and sit with it and hold it and be aware of it. And that's hard. That's hard. And so when you're talking about a word that I don't think is actually a word, but I've always deemed it a word, which is uncomfortability. Sometimes I think one of the hardest things to do is sit with uncomfortability and sit and be uncomfortable and have people tell you, hey, this is my story, my narrative. It needs to be told, it needs to be heard, and it needs to be learned from. And I will say that I think that's really hard for people who have not learned how to sit with uncomfortable feelings. And that goes to be said with anything, not just shame, guilt, intense sadness, grief. It's all across the spectrum. And I think it's this idea, oh, my child is going to go off and learn and become brilliant. But that also means learning everything too, the good and the bad. So I don't know from an educational standpoint, but I can say children are so perceptive. And when a parent says something, they take that in. And I'm sure as educators, you can testify to that. So it's hard. And I would say it's really a disservice to kids in general to be limited in their opportunities of learning.
I think that's one of the, the issues that came up with, like I specifically mentioned with the Ruby Bridges book, is the complaint that there's no redemption for the white people at the end. And it's like, history though, like, so this is what actually happened. And I feel like the discussion on shame, and thinking about that, and I've taught and redesigned with a colleague and taught our multicultural librarianship course last year. And we needed to talk about this. The library profession is overwhelmingly white and overwhelmingly female, and white tears was a topic, and white female tears specifically. And we talked about sitting in your discomfort, and I said, I mean, because for me, I'm like, okay, if I'm sitting, then I'm not moving forward. So to me, I don't want to wallow in it. Like, if it's uncomfortable, yeah, like we can reconcile. And then I think this is maybe the key piece there, is if these parents that are like, well, you're teaching my child to be ashamed of being white. And it's like, well, what is your white identity? Because that's the thing about whiteness, is it really strips all of your identity away. And it's difficult to have a positive white identity. I'm thinking of a book by Dr. Janet Helms. She's a Black, I believe, psychology professor. And she wrote a book, A Race is a Nice Thing to Have. And it's a really good, useful tool, I think, to, I mean, especially for people who are white, to use to kind of unpack some of that, baggage that we don't know that we are carrying, because whiteness is the default. So it's bags you don't know you're dragging behind you. And I think that is asking these parents to engage in a little self-reflection that they are maybe not ready to do yet. So, that's just what I think, though.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, such good points. I really appreciate that bringing up the notion of whiteness as the default, and how that makes it so difficult for many of us to even begin to comprehend the role we play in perpetuating all of these harmful systems for people unlike us. And that's a really hard concept for a lot of people to get their heads around. It's hard for me to get my head around, and I'm trying really hard every day. So it is a challenge. And the other thing that makes me think of, going back to the question of shame, and I really appreciate the pointing out there isn't always a redemption arc in history. Sometimes things are just bad, and that's just something we have to deal with. And I think the flip side of these demands that we sort of mollycoddle the hurt feelings of white children, and to what extent do they even notice what's going on? Is it really just their parents kind of projecting this onto them? That's another question, I suppose. But if we are spending so much time, or school districts are feeling like they might have to start trying really hard in that regard, who's thinking about the feelings of shame and other negative feelings of the children of color? Why are we so willing to accept their shame and sorrow as the default? So just one of those things that rises in me as I think about these things. I think I want to get a little bit personal with y'all, if you don't mind. And I'm just wondering, in your professional capacities, and I know you each have a different model for what that looks like, but do you feel more or less supported in the ways you choose to approach diversity and racial issues in how you conduct your work life, or do you feel like has it been a struggle? Have you encountered resistance from colleagues, from superiors, from teachers when you were in the learning process of your profession? Any thoughts on that? Just I kind of want to get an idea of what kinds of paths you have each had coming to where you are now. It's a hard one.
Well, I'm hesitating because I keep coming on first.
Okay.
Both, both. We have a teachers union here that many of us didn't feel was really looking at the ideas of social justice, not even racism, but social justice. The district that I work in is 95% Black and brown. So, what does it mean to be an educator? Does it stop with your contract? And yet in the back of our contract, there is all of these pieces that talk about professionalism and what that means in terms of, and as you become a teacher, the longer you're a teacher, the more responsibility you have in terms of connecting with the community, serving in the community. So, and that we didn't see that, during the Black Lives Matter protests last year for last summer in Rochester. Or prior to that, I was at a union meeting and brought up how this happened. And the president was like, "Oh, that stuff happens. They're having that." And I go, "We always have, we always have. There's always something happening." So I thought, and sometimes I think that he tends to play the devil's advocate because he wants other people to. So I can't say that unequivocally, but these were the kinds of things. So we started a caucus, myself and a bunch of young kids and a colleague of mine who's, pretty much the same age, and we're both looking at each other. Where have these, where have they been? Where they've been? This is awesome, because we couldn't garner that movement. Her and I couldn't, even serving on executive council. We couldn't make that dent. And then Christmas Eve, there's these conversations. She texts me, she goes, "Are you seeing what's happening here?" So it's Christmas Eve and these young teachers are moms, and they're texting like crazy, and we get this thing off the ground. And that was met with very, very harsh resistance from the union. So I'll leave that there. They have made it. I've exited. I believe this is now a young person's their turn from that aspect, because I'm doing other work now, and they are getting elected. They are, by their peers, and one of them just got elected and is serving on executive council, and she would be the perfect one because she's just not going to sit there, and she already gets it. She gets it. So we are seeing some movement.
It's encouraging. Thank you for sharing that. Would either of the other two of you like to share? And I know maybe it can be a difficult question just because, don't want to rock the boat too much, but
Oh, I'll drill a hole in the boat. I don't care. Like, I have tenure now, so.
Oh, good.
Which is not actually like the bulletproof armor everybody seems to think that it is. It's really just a continuing contract. Like, I could still be fired if I act inappropriately. So I mean, I would say in my work as a school librarian, it was hard to get noticed at all, like for doing things, so I kind of tried to do what I thought was good. And in the last couple of years, the district is moving towards giving us cultural competence training, which again is not critical race theory, but it's something I would say adjacent. And that particularly was aimed at the faculty, the teaching people involved. And I would say that in my work as a professor, we do have academic freedom. I think biggest issue is the glacial pace at which academia does entirely everything. And it's because it's like my colleague and I, took the multicultural librarianship course and totally revamped it. And I mean, gave it a new name, gave it a new course description, totally new contents. And it took an entire year from the start to like get everything finally finalized. So, there are some structural issues in that regard that are not supporting or not as supporting as they could be. But then, I would say like within the department and within the college, this has been a real issue. And I was on our faculty senate, and last year, we worked to create a new standing committee dedicated to equity and inclusion issues, for the institution. So it's like people know they need to do stuff, and we are starting to see some progress, but it's also a little bit because I'm a total quality management person at heart, and it's a little bit arrows all over the place. And I'm like, we need to line these up so that we have a greater impact at the end. But
Yeah, I hear you. I can relate to so much of what you just said, but I'll let Karin, if you have anything you'd like to add, jump on in there.
I think I'll echo Tracey's statement here. Yes and no. I know that I'm one of the youngest people in this facility kind of right now, and I will say that that can be an advantage and a disadvantage sometimes, where I feel like there is a big undercurrent with my generation to make change, make effective change, do things. And I will say from the top down, sometimes that's the hard part is that with any system, there, again, Erin, glacial pace. I mean, how much change can you make and make effectively in any location? This is a controversial statement, but I'm glad to say it. I believe therapy is innately political. I believe it is, and I think it has to be. I believe that I have a moral and ethical responsibility to be aware of what is happening in the world, because these are the people I see and the people I'm with, and I'm hearing their stories. And that itself, the idea that therapy is innately political, is so contested. Do you leave it out of the room? Do you bring it into the room? What does that mean? What does that look like? That's tough, and varying ideas about that. I will say, and just to be frank, I mean, from a perspective of older generations, that has been not the case. And so to create change for mental health about that, that's hard. I will say you have more freedom. The farther you go, the more you're licensed, the more trainings you take. If you go for your doctorate, you have more freedom to figure out what that's going to look like. But I don't work for an agency, but I have interned with an agency before, and your work is very much determined by that agency and by insurance, which is another component that we should mention as part of this problem. So it's tough. I will say that there are a lot of barriers to creating any effective change when it comes to the topic of intersectionality.
I'm so glad to hear you say what you said about therapy being innately political. I would also say librarianship is innately political, and I'm sure I don't want to speak for anyone else, but I would probably indicate that teaching is innately political. And I guess people have a problem with that because they think what that means is if you come to my library and I'm approaching it in a political way, that I'm going to tell you who to vote for. And if you don't vote for who I want you to, I'm not going to serve you. And that's really not the case. And I'm sure you're not telling people who to vote for in being political in your therapeutic sessions. It's about so much more than that. Like that, who you pull the lever for, it's important, but that's just one moment's decision in a huge spectrum of behaviors and beliefs and values. And it's about all of that and using our positions to, try and push the world forward in ways that are beneficial to everyone. It's how I take it anyway. So I was really glad to hear that. And I will also second the glacial pace thing as just being something really difficult to get past. And I really resonate, Aaron, with the fact that you said it was hard for you to get what you were doing noticed. And I can't say that I mean it in the same exact way you do. I'm not entirely sure what your experience was, but like, I feel like in my role as a librarian in a small town, I guess I'm not sure whether what I'm trying to do doesn't get noticed or if it gets just kind of rejected, because I do things like this and I'm very happy to have the turnout that we have here. But I feel like there are missed opportunities to have, as much as I'm just like, oh, okay, phew, nobody is like writing angry messages to us in the chat or anything. And nobody's like, holding up signs that say you're all, commie pinkos and all this stuff. That's good that we're not getting that, but like there are opportunities to impart knowledge and experience that are being missed because I don't know, some people didn't see it in the newspaper or they did see it and they thought that's not for me. Race isn't my problem, when if they were here for 5 minutes, they would know that race is everyone's problem. So I definitely understand that. We're right at the hour and I want to give folks an opportunity, if they have any questions or comments from the audience, an opportunity to chime in. I am going to stop the recording, but before I do, for the panelists, if you just have any final thoughts from your own perspectives on any of this or anything we didn't cover before we see if there are any questions from the audience, I would be happy to hear that. And then I'll stop the recording and we can see what we've got. Does that sound good? Oh, the kitty cat is reaching for their appearance.
He'll just lay here all day. Like, it makes it difficult to type, but I think the one thing that I would say is intersectionality really is the key, because once people understand the concept of intersectionality, they can kind of move past that whole, well, I'm poor, so how am I privileged? Like, it's understanding that the reason you're marginalized is not because of the color of your skin. Like, it's once you understand it's more complex than that, then you can really start to see the systems and how they are put in place to keep everyone in a place. Sorry.
That's really
Come here, baby.
That's good.
Mhm.
I would say that historical knowledge matters. I said I moved away from the union to new union work, yet they still reach out once in a while to get historical understanding.
Mhm.
So, and I would couple that with what you're talking about, Aaron. So this historical understanding coupled with intersectionality, coupled with makes it real. Getting to the point of that or even wanting to begin to understand that is what I think we're really faced with today, and how do we move from there to there? So there's a new place to be. I don't know if it's a new place to begin. I'm certain that, okay.
It's hard. I think that, and I would speak again back to what you said, Alex. Sometimes it's very hard to be empathetic when you are face to face with intolerance. And what does that mean? How do you deal with that? I myself am having a reckoning with Penn Yan, along with several of my wonderful friends who we've all kind of gravitated towards other locations, still in New York, but kind of like a pilgrimage of some kind back to the town. And then what is it like to be there for like a day or two, realize why we left. And unfortunately, the same spiel. I will say, I hold on to the belief that hierarchy of trauma helps nobody. It doesn't. We all got stuff. To connect with other people and realize that they've also gotten stuff. I think sometimes that's the key, to realize, hey, you've been through some crap, and that's not okay. And let me just sit with you with that. I think that maybe in a way, empathy should be the key component here. How do we show and portray empathy in our everyday behavior, with kids, as adults? So.
Awesome. Well, wonderful. Thank you so much for those thoughts. I am going to end the recording just to put a little button on it for the recording. I want to thank my three panelists, Erin, Tracey, and Karen, for being here and sharing all that with us. I just really appreciate that you took the time to give this some thought and spend some time with us here today. So thank you so much. I'll say goodnight to the people who are going to watch the recording later.